They lied to you. They said if you were kind, if you were selfless, if you just gave enough, you'd be loved, respected, protected. But here you are, empty, overlooked, and quietly resented by the very people you tried to save. Because being good is not a virtue in this world. It's a trap. A beautifully wrapped noose that tightens every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you swallow your rage just to keep the peace. Every time you let someone cross a boundary because that's what good people do, right? They don't tell you this, but I will. Goodness without power becomes servitude. And those who serve too long forget how to stand. You feel it, don't you? That burn in your chest when someone takes advantage of your silence. That bitter voice in your head whispering, "Why do I always end up the one who cares more?" That's not guilt. That's your soul revolting against the lie. You were born to be more than a pawn in someone else's story. You were meant to lead, not bleed for causes that don't remember your name. But there's a reason they trained you to be good. Because the good don't ask questions. They don't rebel. They don't bite the hand that feeds them, even if that hand is slowly choking the life out of them. Let me tell you the first truth they buried. Goodness in excess is just self-betrayal in disguise. Look at history. The men who shaped nations weren't nice. They were calculated. They knew when to show mercy and when to sharpen the blade. Think of Niccolo Machiavelli. He wasn't writing fairy tales. He was whispering secrets to the few who dared to rule. He saw what the world really rewards, not virtue but leverage. Not innocence but strategy. And here you are, still hoping that being the bigger person will somehow earn you a crown. It won't. In fact, it'll paint a target on your back. Because the moment they sense your unwillingness to retaliate, to draw a line, to be feared if necessary, that's the moment you lose control. You become predictable, exploitable, replaceable. There's a phrase Machiavelli once wrote, sharp as broken glass. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Not because fear is better, but because love without respect rots into contempt. And the good man, he who is always available, always agreeable, always forgiving, is not respected. He's tolerated until he's no longer needed. Ask yourself, how many times have you been the one who listened at 3 a.m., who helped without being asked, who gave more than you could afford, only to watch them run back to those who gave them nothing? It wasn't your heart that failed. It was your strategy. Because you played a game of war with the rules of peace. And here's the second truth they never wanted you to see. People don't see who you are. They see what you allow. The man who never says no, who never walks away, who never demands, he becomes invisible. Not because he lacks value, but because he never forces others to recognize it. You could have the mind of a king and the heart of a lion, but if you kneel too often, no one will believe you were ever meant to rule. You need to understand the weight of this. Every yes you didn't mean. Every time you avoided conflict just to be liked. Every time you put their comfort above your truth. You weren't being good. You were being silent. And silence is loyalty to your own execution. This world isn't waiting for good men. It's waiting for men who remember what good even means. Strength under control, kindness with teeth, loyalty that is earned, not handed out like a discount. So let me ask you this and be honest. When did you start apologizing for your power? Was it when they called you too much? When they said you should just let it go? When they made you believe that wanting respect made you toxic? They convinced you to amputate pieces of yourself in the name of harmony. But real harmony doesn't come from shrinking. It comes from presence. From a spine of iron wrapped in velvet. And now you're haunted by the ghost of the man you were supposed to become. He's standing behind you, arms crossed, watching how easily you traded your fire for approval. But it's not too late. Because what's broken can be reforged. Not by becoming cruel, but by becoming whole. You see, the opposite of being too good isn't evil. It's precision. It's knowing who deserves your kindness and who earns your distance. It's being able to say no without explanation. It's understanding that forgiveness without consequences isn't compassion, it's enablement. And here's the twist. Once you reclaim that precision, they'll call you cold. Let them. Because what they call cold, Machiavelli called wisdom. He knew that power isn't about domination. It's about perception. The moment you're no longer willing to be used, the moment you start choosing silence as a weapon, not a weakness, that's when the game changes. And it will feel unfamiliar. You'll want to fall back into the old role, the caretaker, the fixer, the good one. But that man died the moment you saw the truth. The new you? He's not here to be liked. He's here to be remembered. And now that you've tasted the forbidden truth, you can't go back. The question is, can you go forward? Because the next thing I'm about to show you, it doesn't just challenge your conditioning. It burns it to the ground. There's a strange silence that comes after the realization hits you. You've been living someone else's definition of virtue. And that silence? It's not peace. It's grief. The mourning of a self you created just to survive. You weren't born good. You were trained to be compliant. It started before you even knew what betrayal meant. Every time you were told to be nice, when your instincts screamed that something was wrong. Every time they said don't be selfish, as if your needs were a sin. Every time you were rewarded not for your strength, but for how well you could ignore it. The curse of being good isn't just about how others treat you. It's about how you begin to treat yourself. You stop trusting your gut. You second-guess every boundary. You punish yourself for feeling anger like it's some kind of infection. And worst of all, you start needing their permission, just to exist in your full power. But here's the savage truth they don't want echoing in your mind. Most people don't want you strong. They want you convenient. Your softness only serves them if it keeps you silent. Your loyalty only matters if it costs you everything. And your so-called goodness? It's only praised as long as it doesn't become inconvenient to their agenda. Let me paint you a picture. A woman once told me about her ex. He was kind, reliable, the type of man who would move mountains just to make her happy. But she left him for someone colder, more distant, someone who didn't worship the ground she walked on. What? Because the first man gave everything too easily. He became predictable. There was no chase, no contrast, no polarity. He made her feel safe but not pulled, loved but not desired. That's the curse. When you give endlessly without cost, people begin to assume your love is bottomless, that your presence is permanent, that your soul has no edge. People don't treasure what they think they own. They treasure what they fear they could lose. This isn't about becoming manipulative. It's about becoming aware. Because when your worth is freely available, when your goodness is unconditional, it becomes invisible. Machiavelli didn't teach cruelty. He taught control. He understood that the illusion of scarcity creates value. When a man shows mercy selectively, it's seen as wisdom. When he gives it blindly, it's seen as weakness. Think of power as a blade. When it's hidden, sheathed, never drawn, it becomes ceremonial, decorative, forgotten. But when it's sharp, when it gleams just beneath the surface, when people know it can be drawn at any moment, that's when it becomes respected. And so must your character be. Not always on display, not always offered, but always present, always precise. You're not meant to be everyone's savior. You're meant to be unshakable. The ones who truly love you, they don't need your obedience. They need your presence. They need to feel the weight of your boundaries, the depth of your silence, the fire behind your eyes when someone disrespects your soul. But let me warn you, the moment you start setting those boundaries, the wolves will howl. They'll say you've changed, that you've become arrogant, cold, distant, and you'll want to explain yourself, to prove that your heart is still pure. Don't. Because here's the forbidden truth. You owe no one access to your warmth. Not friends. Not family. Not lovers. Not society. Your warmth is not a right. It is a privilege. And the moment you realize that, your entire world shifts. You stop seeking validation from people who never even saw you. You stop bleeding for causes that never bled for you. You stop explaining your worth to people who only understand control. This is the part of the transformation where you'll feel like you're becoming someone else. You're not. You're becoming who you were before the world made you forget. That fire in your chest? That's not rage. That's remembrance. And now that the fire's been lit, you need to decide. Are you willing to walk alone, for a while, so you never have to kneel again? Because the man who walks with integrity may lose 100 shallow alliances, but he gains something they'll never taste. Sovereignty. The freedom to move without asking permission. To speak without diluting your truth. To love without losing yourself. To leave without guilt. But to claim that, you have to kill the part of you that needs to be seen as good. You have to bury the martyr. Burn the mask. And carve yourself out of your own bones. That's the rite of passage no one talks about. Because it's messy. It's lonely. It's brutal. But it's real. You will lose people. You will outgrow them like dead skin. You'll wake up one day and realize that 80% of your past connections were rooted in your silence, your compliance, your lack of boundaries. Let them go. What's coming next isn't meant to be shared with the ones who fed on your light. You are being forged now. And forging is not a gentle process. It involves heat, pressure, fracture. It involves looking into the eyes of those who once controlled you, and not flinching. It involves walking into a room not with arrogance, but with the calm knowledge that if necessary, You could burn it to the ground and still rise from the ashes. You are not too much. You are the reckoning they hoped would never arrive. And the best part? They still have no idea what's coming. By now, something inside you has shifted. You're not just hearing the words, you're feeling them. Not just in your mind, but in your bones. In the parts of you that were caged for years under the illusion of being good. But now the cage is rusting. The lock is weakening. And behind the bars, something ancient is awakening. You see, there comes a moment in every man's life when he has to choose. Remain the servant of his old programming, or become the strategist of his new life. And the moment you choose strategy, everything becomes clear. Because suddenly you see what you couldn't see before. You weren't rejected because you were too kind. You were rejected because you didn't value your kindness. You weren't abandoned because you loved too deeply. You were abandoned because you didn't require anything in return. You weren't ignored because you weren't enough. You were ignored because you never made it a cost to ignore you. And now that you see the game for what it really is, it's time to play it like a king. The world doesn't need more good men. It needs men who understand when to be good, and when to be untouchable. It needs men who wield their compassion like a scalpel, not a surrender. Men who can walk into any room and make their presence felt, not with noise but with weight. With stillness. With energy so anchored, even silence bows to them. And that brings us to a truth most aren't ready to hear. To master this world you must become dangerous, but disciplined. Not violent. Not chaotic. Controlled. Because real power is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's precise. It's the man who doesn't need to raise his voice, because his boundaries speak for him. It's the man who doesn't need to chase, because his absence is punishment. It's the man who doesn't need to beg for respect, because he's willing to walk away from anything that insults his value. This is where you transform. From the servant to the sovereign. From the pleaser to the player of the game. And as you begin to move differently, they'll feel it. The people who once leaned on your compliance, they'll sense the shift. They won't know exactly what changed, but they'll feel like they've lost access to something they never truly appreciated. Let them. Because your energy is no longer cheap. You don't text first just to prove your loyalty. You don't over-explain just to be understood. You don't break yourself into pieces just to be digestible. You stand. You observe. You choose. And when you give now, it's not out of obligation. It's out of selection. You become the storm they can't predict. The presence they can't control. And the soul they can no longer manipulate. But I'll warn you again. This path is not for the faint-hearted. Because to become this version of yourself, you must let die the part that still believes everyone is good deep down. You must accept that some people only smile to disarm you. That guilt is a tool used by cowards to keep warriors small. That being morally correct often has nothing to do with being effective. Machiavelli knew this. That's why he taught rulers to appear merciful, religious, honest, while mastering the art of deceit underneath it all. Not because he glorified evil, but because he understood reality. And reality doesn't reward purity. It rewards power cloaked in virtue. That's your evolution. You stop seeking fairness. You start seeking advantage. You stop asking what you're allowed to do, and you start doing what's necessary. If someone violates your boundary once, you disappear. Not to punish, but because silence is more expensive than rage. If someone disrespects you in public, you remember it. Not to dwell, but because memory is a weapon, and the best players never forget the board. If someone betrays you, you don't scream, you don't beg. You become unreachable. The old you would have chased. The new you watch them self-destruct from a throne of detachment. Because now you understand something lethal. You are no longer the prey. You are the strategist. And strategists don't react. They move in silence. They study patterns. They spot weakness not to exploit it, but to guard themselves from it. They know who's worth saving, and who's better left drowning in their own manipulation. And that is true power. Because once you become the man who doesn't need to be liked, they start to respect you. Once you become the man who can walk away, they start to cling. And once you become the man who knows his worth down to the cellular level, the entire world begins to bend to that certainty. So here we are. You've shed the skin of the obedient. You've buried the mask of the martyr. And what stands here now is something dangerous. Not because you're cruel, but because you can no longer be controlled. They will fear this version of you. They will misunderstand him. They will call him cold, arrogant, intimidating. Let them. Because they only label what they cannot tame. And you, my friend, are no longer meant to be tamed. Look at yourself. No, really. Not with the eyes the world trained you to use. Not through the filters of guilt, shame, or fear, but with the eyes of the one you were before they broke you. What do you see? You see a man who's been forged through silence, shaped by sacrifice, and sharpened by betrayal. You see someone who spent years trying to be good, but never truly felt free. A man who begged for permission to be seen, only to become invisible. But that version of you is gone now. And in its place, something else has emerged. Not softer, not sweeter, stronger, smarter, colder, more precise than pain, more dangerous than rage. Because now you know the truth. Being good was never the goal. Being whole was. And sometimes wholeness requires war. Not with others, but with the parts of you that were taught to kneel, to beg, to shrink every time someone called your strength too much. You're done with that. You no longer carry the shame of your power. You no longer apologize for your silence. You no longer explain your no. You no longer try to fix what was never yours to heal. Because the curse of being good? It was never about morality. It was about control. They fed you rules to keep you soft. Taught you to forgive everything, so you'd never retaliate. Told you real strength is kindness, just so you'd never learn to set fire to what needed to burn. But now you've seen behind the curtain. And what's back there isn't fair. It isn't pure. It isn't balanced. It's calculated. It's psychological. Strategic. And the people who thrive in this world? They're not the most loving. They're the most aware. Aware of how attention works. Aware of how guilt is weaponized. Aware of how kindness is often a leash. And now, you're one of them. You've stepped out of the prison of performance. You've dropped the act. You've taken the mask and crushed it beneath your boot. You've learned the most forbidden truth of all. It is better to be feared for your boundaries than loved for your compliance. Because love that demands your silence is not love, it's control. And peace that costs your soul is not peace, it's prison. But now you don't trade your truth for safety. You don't offer your light to those who only want to dim it. You don't water yourself down to keep others comfortable. You know your worth. And the man who knows his worth? He becomes untouchable. Not because he hides behind walls, but because he builds gates. And only those with honor get in. That's your new power. To choose. To discern. To cut ties when the energy is wrong. To walk away without announcing it. To disappear not out of weakness, but as a final act of strength. And those who once feasted on your forgiveness? They won't know what to do when the supply is gone. They'll rage. They'll call you names. They'll guilt-trip you, manipulate you, beg you to be who you were. But that man is dead. You buried him. And in his place is a storm with a heartbeat. One that doesn't destroy everything in its path, but guards what's sacred. One that doesn't need to be loud, because his silence echoes. One that doesn't look for revenge, because living on your own terms is already lethal. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't fear solitude, because solitude is where you trained. Where you learned to sit with the ghosts and let them speak. Where you stopped fearing the dark, and became it. They don't understand this version of you. Because you were never meant to be understood. You were meant to be felt. Not in words, but in weight. And those who try to pull you back into your old skin? Let them choke on their expectations. You owe no one softness at the cost of your edge. You owe no one kindness at the cost of your clarity. You owe no one explanation for the way you protect your energy. You are the fire they tried to tame. The sword they tried to dull. The king they tried to convince he was a servant. But now you remember. You are not here to please. You are here to rule. In silence. In strategy. In absolute, unshakable presence. That is the end of the curse. And the beginning of your reign. So let them whisper. Let them wonder what happened to you. Let them miss the man who bled for their comfort. You are not that man anymore. You are the cold hand on the door they never thought you'd close. The storm they never believed would walk away. And now that you've tasted this power, you will never starve again. If this hit your soul like a war drum, don't stay silent. Drop a comment below. Let the others know the curse is real, but so is the escape. Like, share, subscribe. This isn't a channel. It's a revolution. And this was just the beginning. Welcome to the war behind the smile. And remember, the world doesn't belong to the good. It belongs to the ones who dared to outgrow the illusion. Keep your edge sharp. Keep your soul intact. And never, ever kneel again. We're watching. And you're not alone anymore.